The text didn't break my heart. It tripped an alarm. I want a divorce. I've met someone who makes me happy. I read the sentence twice while a cursor blinked on an audit log in front of me, a patient metronome in a quiet sea of numbers. My name is Adrian Cole. I'm 45 years old, and for the last 2 decades I've been the guy people call when money starts misbehaving. Officially, I'm a financial systems analyst for Meridian Federal Systems in Raleigh. Unofficially, I'm the sort of person who can spot a bad transfer in a hayfield of transactions from 50 yards out, blindfolded. My wife, Lila, was supposed to be in Denver for a marketing summit. 3 days. Routine. We'd said our goodbyes the night before, exchanged the kind of peck people mistake for affection when they're not looking too closely. I'd watched her wheel a silver suitcase to the Uber and lift a hand without turning around. I told myself she was stressed. I told myself a lot of things. A second text landed before the first could finish echoing across my chest. I already moved the retirement money to a private account. Keep the house if you want. I don't need it. I set my coffee down carefully enough that the mug didn't clink. Then I opened a window on my second monitor and authenticated into a dashboard only 3 people in the world knew existed because I built it. I called it the Loom. Too dramatic, according to my team lead, but accurate. Threads of accounts, assets, logins, and behavioral patterns woven together until anything out of place pulsed like a wound. There they were. 2 withdrawals, split across our retirement plans to avoid triggering a single large fund alert. Clever, if the system on the other side looked for big numbers only. Mine didn't. The Loom didn't love or hate, plead or accuse. The Loom counted. It watched baselines hum like a heartbeat and screamed when they didn't. Lila's transfers didn't scream. They sang quietly. Wrong tempo, wrong key, wrong hand signature. Federal regulations prefer to sound agnostic, but they are, at their core, curious. Unusual activity from protected accounts? The rules don't ask how your marriage is doing. They ask for verification. They seize first and ask gently later. Within minutes, my overlay synced with the custodians, and the custodians did what they were built to do. Everything froze. Every penny she'd tried to uproot hardened into ice. By noon, 3 compliance departments had sent polite versions of the same message. Review initiated, funds unavailable pending investigation. I acknowledged each with a thank you. The fraud flags weren't mine to lift. And anyway, I had a different client's mess to untangle. A community credit union in the foothills whose bookkeeper confused petty cash with personal treat. I went back to their ledger, to the soothing order of columns and stamps and times. Across the room, the afternoon sun lifted dust out of nothing and made it visible. There's a particular silence after betrayal, a bright, thin stillness as if a pane of glass has dropped over your life. I've listened to it before. When my father left, I was 9 and learned overnight how to vacuum without leaving tracks. When my mother cried into the dishwater and said it was just 2 adults being adults, I filed the phrase with all the other labels people use when they can't bear the truth. The Loom doesn't label. It just knows what is and is not. We grew up together, Lila and I. Pittsburgh kids, 2 years apart. I kept stats for the baseball team and fixed the scoreboard when the count jammed between 3-1 in full. She ran student council campaigns and promised to make prom more affordable. She had a laugh you could hear from the parking lot and a kindness that felt like sun on a cold day. We were young and certain. I thought certainty was the same thing as structure. I thought if I built systems sturdy enough, life would hold. When we got married at 23, in a church that smelled like pine disinfectant and old hymnals, I promised what young men promise: everything. We rented an apartment over a bakery, learned the schedule of dawn deliveries by osmosis, and took turns washing powdered sugar off the windowsills. When I landed the job at Meridian, Lila framed the offer letter like it was an album cover. "Look at us," she said. "Real people with real plans." Our plans were simple: save, be good, pay attention. I took numbers home with me. She took people. While I built platforms for catching fraud across hundreds of thousands of accounts, Lila became a rising star at Kian Creative, a marketing firm that paid just enough to keep people running and promised just enough to keep them from stopping. She learned cities by their airports. Conferences, summits, panels, touching base, with clients in hotel bars where the stools always wobbled but the lights made everyone beautiful. 6 months ago, the fog began to settle. She stopped asking about retirement projections. She forgot to laugh at my terrible jokes about amortization and instead stared through the kitchen window like something was happening just beyond the fence. 3 months ago, a credit card arrived in a padded envelope with her name and our address, issued by a bank we'd never used. Company card, she said, too quickly. They're moving us to a new travel program. I nodded and didn't press. 2 weeks ago, she stood in the guest room doorway and said, "We should get rid of that futon. Who even stays here anymore?" I offered that my sister sometimes visited. She shrugged and wandered back to her phone. The Tuesday before Denver, she sat across from me at the table, eating Thai takeout and scrolling. "What's the final number?" she asked without looking up. "For retirement. I know you track it down to the penny." I told her. It should have felt like pride. It felt like handing someone a map to your house and telling them which window you never quite remember to lock. The Friday after her texts, she called at 11:47 a.m. Her voice was flat and sharp, a blade on a cutting board. "My card isn't working. What's your available balance?" "Zero." "How is it zero?" She cut herself off. "Unusual transfers from protected accounts get flagged. The firms freeze the movement while they verify. 5 to 7 business days. Longer if they find inconsistencies." "You did this." "The system did it." She inhaled to speak and then didn't. The line went quiet long enough for me to hear air conditioner ducts click on in the ceiling above my office. "How long?" she said finally. "I told you." The click came again. "I didn't think you'd notice," she said. It was almost a whisper. "Not right away." "I notice." She hung up. There's a story people tell about betrayal, that the anger comes first, red and rushing. It didn't, not for me. What came was design. I moved through the rest of Friday, setting things where they belonged. I opened a clean folder on my desktop and labeled it with the date. I sent my boss a note that I'd be working quietly from home a few days, but available for emergencies. I put our wedding photo, the one with the pine disinfectant church and the sun on Lila's hair, face down on my bookshelf. Then, at 5 p.m., I drove to a small law office on West Morgan and told a man named Sanford what had happened. "File now," he said without looking theatrical about it. "You've got clean documentation. Don't touch the frozen assets. Don't respond to any accusations. We'll let the facts breathe." So I filed. Petition for dissolution. No alimony. Division of property, as per the prenup we'd signed when we were children pretending to be cautious adults. People teased us for that document back then. I was grateful for it now. The house had been purchased in my name after a promotion when Lila said she preferred not to be tied to the mortgage in case she wanted to invest elsewhere. I had accepted that without reading between the lines. That night, I made spaghetti heavier than usual and ate it standing at the kitchen counter. The house creaked around me like a ship settling into a new sea. When I washed the plate, I used too much soap and too hot water and considered calling Lila's mother. What would I say? "Your daughter tried to plunder our savings and got caught by a machine I built in my spare time?" It felt like a story you assigned to children to scare them into using strong passwords. Saturday morning, I vacuumed the guest room and donated the futon to a thrift store that picked up in a truck with a door that wouldn't close properly. I boxed Lila's college yearbooks and put them in the attic next to our Christmas decorations, which smelled faintly of cedar and dust and last year's cinnamon cookies. I drove to the dump and threw out 3 bags of old paperwork I'd always meant to shred. I emptied myself of debris I could measure. I couldn't get rid of what I couldn't. By Tuesday, my system flagged something new. 3 credit applications, filed within 48 hours, all from devices associated with our address. Declined, all 3, because the bureaus had marked her profile for potential fraud due to the frozen retirement transfers. I watched the flags pop and liked it less than I expected to. Satisfaction didn't arrive. The loom had never promised joy, only accuracy. On Wednesday, my phone lit with a work contact I hadn't expected. "Is Lila actually in Denver?" asked a man named Keegan, HR at Kian Creative. He sounded polite the way people sound when they suspect they're about to need a lawyer. "She told me she was. She isn't on any of the registration lists." "I can't help you," I said, which was true and also convenient. He hesitated. "We've noticed irregularities in her expense reports." A pause. "We'll be conducting an internal review." I ended the call and stood in the doorway of my home office for longer than it takes to decide what to do next. In my experience, people imagine crashes. But most structures fail quietly first. Weight shifts unnoticed. Hairline cracks widen in the dark. One morning you touch a wall, and it turns to powder. On Thursday, a letter slid under my door at work. A courier envelope with an embossed return address and an expensive smell. Inside, an emergency motion filed by Lila's attorney asking the court to unfreeze critical living funds and accusing me of weaponizing professional expertise to sabotage marital assets. Sanford read the paper and laughed once, like a cough. They're going to say you pushed a button. I didn't push anything. I know. We'll make sure the judge knows. He looked up. Keep every notification. We want timestamps. We want flows. Friday morning, the courthouse felt like a school gym. Flat light, institutional air, 100 footsteps turned into a single shapeless sound. I hadn't seen Lila since her texts. She stood with her lawyer 20 feet away, smaller than I remembered, paler. The way her hand kept going to her hair told me what I didn't want to know. She was afraid. I was mean once in my head. I thought, fear is what happens when people who never planned for consequences are introduced to them. The hearing lasted 19 minutes. The judge, a woman whose face suggested she'd coached teenage basketball in a past life, scanned the filings, asked 2 questions about chain of custody on the alerts, and ruled that our joint checking account, $3,000 I'd left untouched, would serve for basic living expenses until the investigation concluded. The request to unfreeze retirement was denied without ceremony. We were excused before we could build an argument on top of a plea. In the hall, Lila tried to find my eyes. Adrian, she said very softly. I don't know what expression lived on my face. I know I didn't speak. I walked past a potted plant that had been dying for years and into a day full of perfect weather I couldn't feel. The following Monday, a new player entered from stage left, a man with a clipped haircut and a handshake like he was trying not to win too hard. Greg Pearson, he said, flashing a badge. Eastern Compliance Division. Do you have a minute? We sat in a conference room at Meridian that smelled like microwaved soup and carpet cleaner. Greg set a folder on the table and tapped it with one finger. We're auditing Kian Creative. The company flagged misallocated budgets. Your system pinged wider activity. We'd like to understand how your monitoring caught what we missed. Because I'm paranoid, I said. He smiled. Paranoia built the internet. I walked him through the Loom's architecture. Baseline of recurring amounts per account branch. Time of day pattern mapping. 2-person authorization thresholds. Cross-entity triangulation for transfers that appear small when isolated but large in aggregate. He nodded as if he understood all of it, and may have. Then he opened his folder and slid a printout across the table. On it, a network of names and thin black lines, like a family tree trying to hide its more interesting branches. Lila's name sat near the center. Another name I didn't recognize, Victor Price, connected to her with 3 lines and the annotation shared approvals. For other employees orbited nearby. They've been laundering marketing budget through phantom vendors, Greg said. Small monthly payments. $200 here, $750 there. Over 2 years it becomes real money. $2 million, if our early estimate holds. The approvals came from your wife's credentials. Cross-verified by Mr. Price. I'd spent 20 years teaching machines to hear the difference between rain and footsteps. In that moment, I heard neither. Only my pulse, oddly polite. What do you need from me? I asked. Your records, he said. Your logs, your timestamps, your proof of concept. We want to make sure the defense can't claim this is a domestic dispute dressed up as a compliance issue. I provided everything. The Loom's clean splits between joint and individual accounts. The way it hashed each alert with a grid of markers that would make a liar's life harder. The exact times Lila's transfers attempted to cross the line, and the forming of the line itself. Greg left with a thank you and a promise. We'll keep you updated. And Mr. Cole? Yes. You did the right thing building this. I almost told him I'd built it because I was afraid of what happened if I didn't. I thought about my mother at a sink, the night my father left, the way she dried the same plate 3 times. Thank you, I said instead. By Wednesday, the Loom found something else, this time outside the digital. Our realtor, James Everett, a man with perfect hair and an allergy to clutter, called me. Are you putting your house on the market? Not at the moment. Odd. I received a message from a buyer's rep eager to secure it. Cash offer, expedited closing. Price is low. $300,000. We bought for just under that 5 years ago, I said. The market would fetch 5 now. Exactly, James said, a voice creeping into his voice he usually reserved for warning people about asbestos. The rep used your wife's maiden name, which is unprofessional. They wanted to move fast. When we hung up, I stared at the wall long enough to watch a tiny crack in the paint extend itself like it had been waiting for an invitation. I called Detective Sarah Lynn at the Raleigh Financial Crimes Unit because her card had been paper-clipped to Greg's folder. She listened. You won't be our only victim, she said. We've been tracking a pattern. Corporate folks under financial review. Real estate offers that undercut market values. Straw buyers. Quick flips. It looks bland so no one looks. How many families? I asked. Right now? 12. Maybe more. It wasn't grief. It was something narrower, meaner. The particular disgust you feel when someone treats people's existence as a math problem to optimize for theft. On Thursday, Lila's attorney filed for an emergency modification again. The judge declined again. That afternoon, a new lawyer called on Lila's behalf. Patricia had withdrawn. Public defender now. She's willing to concede all marital property, he said, in exchange for your character testimony at sentencing. Sentencing hasn't happened, I said. It will. I closed my eyes. I pictured Lila at 19, in a thrift store denim jacket with a patch that said, "Do the thing," lecturing me about being too careful. I'll testify to the truth, I said. No adjectives. No stories. Just the part one saw. The federal indictments arrived in a brown envelope that made a startlingly heavy sound when it hit the floor by my door. Lila, Victor Price, for others at Kian. Wire fraud. Conspiracy. Embezzlement. The charging document spoke in that arid, relentless tone the law uses when it's pretending not to be impressed with itself. Bail denied due to flight risk. Lila texted me from county 2 days later. I never meant for it to go this far. I stared at the message and felt empty. Words mean exactly what they mean. You didn't mean to get caught. I wrote back and then regretted sending it. Not because it wasn't true, but because I'd finally let anger in, and it wore a face I didn't like. Grand jury came and went in a building whose elevators smelled like burnt dust. I explained my system with diagrams and analogies and the patience of a man who has taught old software new tricks for 20 years. The triggers aren't personal, I said. The system doesn't know who you married. It knows only what patterns look like when they're honest and what they look like when they're not. The assistant U.S. attorney played recordings obtained from Lila's firm. The compliance officer had been busier than I thought. In one, Victor's voice said, jovial and cold, "The husband's a Boy Scout. He'll never open her work laptop. You can move 50 grand a year, and it will look like garden maintenance." Another recording took whatever air I had left. Lila, my wife of 22 years, saying, "Adrian's too focused on his world. He'll miss mine." I didn't miss it. I just respected boundaries. There's a difference people don't understand until someone uses it against them. The trial lasted 17 days. The courtroom air was always too cold. My tie never lay flat. On day 12, under lights that made everyone's skin look like an exhibit, Victor decided he loved daylight more than loyalty. He took a deal. 7 years for cooperation instead of 25 for courage. He mapped the scheme. He explained the approvals, the ghost vendors, the property flips. He described the system like a magician bragging after the trick is done. People like him are never as smart as they think they are. They're just more confident about being mediocre in public. On day 17, the jury came back. Guilty on 12 counts of wire fraud. Guilty on 8 counts of conspiracy. Guilty on 2 counts of embezzlement. The judge scheduled sentencing 6 weeks out. I walked out of the courtroom past the place where an old janitor leaned on a mop and watched the parade of sins with the weary attention of a man who has outlasted many headlines. I didn't talk to reporters. I didn't call friends. I went home. The kitchen smelled like the lemon cleaner I'd used that morning. I threw away the sponge and opened a window and told myself the air would eventually change. 6 weeks later, the sentences fell like furniture being pushed across a floor upstairs. Lila got 18 years. Victor got 9. 2 of the others took 5 and 3. The last pled out to probation and a thin life of explaining. The judge ordered restitution to the companies and to the families who'd nearly lost their homes for less than they were worth. The judge did not order my forgiveness. That remains the one thing courts can't issue on paper. The The divorce finalized on a Tuesday that felt very much like a Wednesday. I signed where Sanford told me to sign. So did Lila, in a different room, in a different building, wearing a different kind of uniform than the one she preferred all those years. The house was mine on paper now. It had never felt less like mine. I sold it anyway. Market was still strong in our zip code. After fees, I got just under $500,000. Enough to begin again somewhere the walls didn't know our names. I bought a small one-story place in Wilmington, walkable to a coffee shop that roasts their own beans and a park where the Spanish moss makes the light look like it's remembering something. Meridian offered me remote. I took it. Twice a week, I drove to a classroom at Cape Fear Community College and taught a night course called The Shape of Money, Behavioral Fraud Detection in Modern Systems. 30 students. Some in hoodies, some in work shirts with their names stitched above their hearts. We practiced reading patterns like other people practice scales. The first thing I told them on the first night: trust is not an absence of systems. It's what systems make possible. Slowly, my life reassembled. Groceries instead of takeout. A stack of library books in a basket by the couch. Saturday mornings at a farmer's market where a man in a straw hat sells tomatoes that taste like how August sounded when we were children. I learned my neighbor's dogs' names before I learned my neighbor's names. I fixed a loose plank on my porch and felt, for the first time in months, the clean satisfaction of a thing put right by hands. Letters started coming from the prison. The first was 3 pages. The second was 1. The third was a paragraph. I got lost, she wrote in the second. I started with a little, and then the little became the map. Victor said it would be easy. I stopped hearing you in my head and started hearing him. I didn't answer. I didn't write her back to tell her that the voice she'd stopped hearing wasn't mine. It was her own, from long ago, when she believed that being good at people didn't have to mean being terrible at consequences. One afternoon in October, almost a year after the texts, a woman named Carla stopped me in the cereal aisle at a grocery store. "Are you Adrian?" she asked. Her voice shook a little like she'd rehearsed saying my name, and then didn't like the sound of it out loud. "Yes. My husband works for one of the companies your system helped. We almost sold our house for the wrong price." She blinked hard. "They paid us what it was worth after the investigation. We kept it." I didn't know what to do with my hands. "I'm glad," I said. It sounded insufficient and still true. "It mattered," she said, and then left quickly, pushing a cart with a loose wheel, crying into the handle like it didn't notice. Meridian rolled my contributions into a new platform. Not the loom exactly, something broader, with a team assigned. The company named it Lighthouse, which I disliked until I saw what it felt like to a bank manager in a small town who could finally see rocks in the fog. I consulted sometimes for Eastern compliance on cases that smelled like the one I'd walked out of. My name stayed off the headlines. Fine by me. I had coffee and work and a porch. I had a class full of people who might someday build something better than I did. Maybe they'd build it so good that men like Victor wouldn't even try, and women like Lila would never listen. On the 2-year mark, I drove inland to visit my mother. She'd moved to a smaller place near Siler City with a neighbor who played cards and told stories badly. We ate sandwiches at her tiny table, and she asked me, as she always did, if I'd met anyone nice. "Not yet," I said. "You will," she said with the casual authority of a person who has been right about things you didn't believe at the time. "You'll pick someone who understands the difference between a budget and a promise. And you'll tell them about your systems before you tell them about your favorite movie. And they'll love you for both." On the drive home, I took the long way. The highway cut through pines and little towns with gas stations that sell hot dogs in glass cases. The radio played a song I didn't know. I turned it off and listened to my tires on the road. It sounded like my own heartbeat finally at the pace you hope for when the crisis is over and you're allowed to go home. A week later, I opened my garage and found a cardboard box I didn't recognize. Inside, the framed offer letter Lila had once turned into art, a floppy disk with the words "First Taxes" written in purple marker, a denim jacket with a patch that said, "Do the thing." No note. The return address was the prison's mailroom. I held the jacket for a while and put it in the closet behind the winter coats. I didn't throw it away. You don't throw away artifacts. You put them in a place where they can't hurt you, and then you keep walking past them until they lose the power you gave them. If you're waiting for a final showdown, there isn't one. There was no cathartic speech in a visiting room. No dramatic forgiveness gesture under flickering fluorescent lights. Life is less theatrical than you think, more procedural. We build routines and hope they hold. When they don't, we build new ones. The quiet revenge is this. I wake up every morning in a house that does not lie to me. I make coffee with a kettle that groans slightly as it heats, the way old kettles do, the way my knees do when it rains. I sit at a table and review a cluster of transactions from a bank in Ohio and find the place where a bad actor tried to hide. I send the report. I shower. I go teach. A student asks if systems make us less human. I tell them the truth. Systems don't replace trust. I say, they allow it. Some nights, after I grade papers, I walk down to the river. The water moves with that ancient competence that doesn't require your approval. Boats slide by, flat-decked working ones, sleek weekend ones, kayaks that look like punctuation against the dark. The lights on the far bank are steady. The breeze off the water smells like salt and old memory. I put my hands on the railing and remember the first time the loom caught something real and the way the client cried, not with grief, but with relief. That's what I want my life to be for other people now, a structure they can lean on when their human hearts cannot carry the weight. 3 years after her sentencing, I received a final letter from Lila. She didn't ask for anything. She didn't mention appeals or programs or time served. She wrote about a class she was taking in a prison classroom with walls the color of chewing gum. She said they were teaching basic accounting to women who had never learned to balance a checkbook and who couldn't remember a life in which anyone trusted them with more than a plastic spork. I think, she wrote, that if someone had shown me the right spreadsheet early enough, I would have made better choices. At the bottom, in small handwriting, she added, "You would have. I didn't let you." I folded the letter and placed it with the others. The file on my shelf isn't labeled revenge or justice. It's labeled closed. That's what it is. Not triumph. Not tragedy. A case in which the facts did what facts do when they're allowed oxygen. One of my students asked me last week why I don't sound angrier when I talk about all this. I told him anger is useful during a crisis. It makes you move. But order is what keeps you standing once the dust is down. He asked if I believe in second chances. I believe in first structures, I said, and in building them well enough that if somebody tries to set fire to them, the alarms go off before the beams fail. He looked at me like I'd given him something to carry into a life that would test him in ways he couldn't yet imagine. I hoped I had. I hoped the looms he'd build would hum quieter and wider than mine. I hoped the people he loved would never find out what happens when money replaces truth. If there's a moral here, I don't own it. The story is simple. A person I loved made a choice. A system I built made another. Between the two, the future walked through and selected its wardrobe. What I have now is a porch, a class, a job that trusts me, a mother who tells me I will fall in love when I stop looking for a woman who laughs exactly like the girl in the denim jacket used to. I have a city that smells like salt and redemption. I have a kettle that sings when it's ready. And I have a piece of code named for the thing my father didn't do with us, the thing I do now with numbers and with people who deserve it. I watch the threads. I pay attention. I pull when something snags. I let go when the weave holds by itself. That's the closest I'll ever come to vengeance, and it is more than enough.